morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. So this morning I was going to try to focus my attention on two very specific parts of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Two stanzas in particular that describe in detail how the Pied Piper's music affects the perception of the rats and later how it affects the perception of the children. And I just want to introduce those stanzas. I want to sort of put them in the context of Plato's Republic. And one of the things that Plato said about art in the Republic is that it is imitation of life. It's like, well, this goes back to Plato's idea of forms, and so there's art is a copy of a copy of the form. So there's a form, then there's the thing, there's the concept of a table, then there's the actual table, and then there's the representation of the table. And art is the imitation of the real thing. And anyways, Plato felt that a lot of artistic representation was something that would cause people to imitate bad behavior. So he felt that in the Republic, art needed to be controlled, limited. I'm not exactly sure what kind of remedies he would have for art in the ideal republic. But we see that in the Pied Piper of Hamelin by Robert Browning, we see that effect that art can have, especially in the description of how the rat's perception is affected by the music that the Pied Piper plays. So I'm just gonna recite that entire stanza, and I'm going to try to explain to you what I feel is the abstract argument that is being made in that concrete details of that narrative. Into the street the piper stepped, smiling first a little smile, as if he knew what magic slept in his quiet pipe the while. Like a musical adept, to blow his pipe his lips he wrinkled, and green and blue his sharp eyes twinkled, like a candle flame where salt is sprinkled. And ere 3 shrill notes the pipe uttered, you heard as if an army muttered, and a muttering grew to a grumbling, and a grumbling grew to a mighty rumbling, and out of the houses came the rats tumbling, great rats, small rats, lean rats, brawny rats, brown rats, black rats, grey rats, tawny rats, grave old plotters, gay young friskers, fathers, mothers, uncles, cousins, cocking tails and pricking whiskers, families by tens and dozens, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, followed the Pied Piper for their lives. From street to street he piped advancing, and step for step they followed dancing, until they came to the river Weser, wherein all plunged and perished, save one who stout as Julius Caesar swam across and lived to carry, as he the manuscript he cherished, to Ratland home his commentary, which was, at first shrill notes of the pipe, I heard a sound as of scraping tripe, and putting apples wondrous ripe into the cider presses gripe, and a moving away of pickle tub boards, and a leaving a jar of conserve cupboards, and drawing the corks of train oil flasks, and the breaking the hoops of butter casks. And it seemed as if a voice, sweeter far than by harp or by psaltery is breathed, called out, "O rats, rejoice! The world has grown to a vast dry saltery. So munch on, crunch on, take your nudge on, breakfast, supper, dinner, lunch on, and just the bulky sugar punch on, already staved like a great sun shone, gracious scarce an inch before me, just as me thought had said, come before me, I found the vessel rolling over me." So in that stanza, the last half of that stanza is very, very important to my argument. So about from the line, wherein all plunged and perished, save one who stout as Julius Caesar swam across and lived to carry, as he the manuscript he cherished, to Ratland home his commentary. So in that part of the poem, they describe how the rats plunge into the river Weser, and there's one rat who's stout as Julius Caesar, was able to swim across and return to whatever Ratland is with his commentary. So he returns to the Ratland with his commentary, and he tells his rat friends or whatever, whoever he's telling this, it's part of the narrative that we're, listening to or reading or whatever, right? But obviously some anthropomorphism going on here. To Ratland home his commentary, which was at first shrill notes of the pipe. So at the first shrill notes of the pipe, once the rats have heard the music, they begin to experience hallucinations that are described henceforth, which is that, so to Ratland home his commentary, which was at first shrill notes of the pipe, I heard a sound as of scraping tripe, and putting apples wondrous ripe into the cider presses gripe. So we see that the music that the Pied Piper is playing conjures an image of reality that is actually delusional, right? So if we put that into the context of Plato's Republic, which is that art, that the argument that Plato made was that art is imitation of life. It's a copy of a copy. There's the form, and then there's the actual thing, and then there's the representation of that thing. And art is the representation of that thing, of those things. Land home his commentary, which was at first shrill notes of the pipe. I heard a sound as of scraping tripe, and putting apples wondrous ripe into the cider presses grape, and a moving away of pickled boards, and a leaving a jar of conserve cupboards, and a drawing the corks of train oil flasks, and the breaking the hoops of butter casks. And it seemed as if a voice, sweeter far than by harp or by psaltery is breathed, called out, "O rats, rejoice! The world has grown to a vast dry saltery. So munch on, crunch on, take your nunch on. Breakfast, supper, dinner, lunch on. And just as a bulky sugar punch on, already stave like a great sun shone. Gracious, scarce an inch before me, just as methought it said come bore me, I found the Weser rolling over me." So we just need to put that into the, how do we conceptualize that within the Republic? I think that Robert Browning must be aware that art, that there is art that causes harm in society. There's art that, and this is a really relevant debate to our own time. We're always talking about how video games and, rap lyrics or heavy metal songs are influencing the bad behavior of our children or whoever. How is art something that influences that behavior, or is it just something that reflects something that already exists? And I think that Plato was saying that I think Plato believed that art actually is something that influences and inspires bad behavior or immoral conduct. And that's one of the reasons why he felt like it would be unnecessary in a republic. But remember yesterday I sort of spoke to the fact that the town of Hamlin is actually a democracy because the mayor has been elected by the people. They've elected him and the council, and they've even bought them expensive robes to wear. So that's one vision that Robert Browning gives us, the effect of like art can lead us to a dystopian, you know, like for the rats, they were led to, you know, they're led to their deaths. It created this utopia of abundance and spoilage and wastage. Like it created a world where all the doors to consumption were, you know, blasted open. So the rats could delight in endless consumption and gluttony, devour everything in front of them. So Robert Browning seems to be saying that in the democracy of Hamelin, there's two possibilities. There's one I've already described, which is that the art that the Pied Piper uses to you know, seduce or whatever, manipulate, control. I think we can include in art propaganda too, right? So like what the Pied Piper represents, what the music of the Pied Piper represents is, you know, propagandistic expression is artistic, right? We know this from the Nazis. We know this from communist, you know, from Soviet communism, that artistic expression can be used to serve the interest of state control. So, in the democracy of Hamelin Town, we see that the music that the Pied Piper plays influences the behavior of the rats to seek out their own death, to seek out dystopia. In the next example from the poem, we're offered a second vision of what art accomplishes in society. So we're presented with the stanza which describes how the children are abducted. So, you know, where they're They're hypnotized by the Pied Piper's music. So in this stanza, it pretty much mirrors the last stanza, the one that describes how the rats are hypnotized and lured to their catastrophic demise. So it goes, once more he stepped into the street, and to his lips again laid his long pipe of smooth straight cane, and ere he blew 3 notes, such sweet soft notes as yet sorry, I got mixed up there. Once more he stepped into the street, and to his lips again laid his long pipe of smooth straight cane, and ere he blew 3 notes, such sweet soft notes as yet musicians cunning never gave the enraptured air. There was a rustling that seemed like a bustling of merry crowds justling at pitching and hustling. Small feet were pattering, wooden shoes clattering, little hands clapping, and little tongues chattering, and like foals in a farmyard where barley is scattering, out came the children, with rosy cheeks and flax and curls, and sparkling eyes and teeth like pearls, tripping and skipping ran merrily after, the wonderful music was shouting and laughter. So then it goes on to the next stanza, and I want you to listen to the last half of this stanza, like the last probably about 10 lines of the stanza. And this whole sequence of events mirrors the exact sequence of events of how the rats are lured to hypnotized and lured into the river Lesser. So there's those in this episode of the poem. There's a child left behind, like the rat left behind, the stout Julius Caesar that I already described earlier. But he's not a stout Julius Caesar. He's the opposite. He's a lame boy. He's a crippled boy with a limp. I'm not yet sure what to make of that. So we have a survivor, the rat survivor, the one who escapes the river Weser. He's a stout Julius Caesar. And then in the next part of the poem, the boy that avoids being abducted by the Pied Piper and is left behind. He's a lame boy with a crippled leg. Once more he stepped into the street, and to his lips again laid his long pipe of smooth straight cane. And ere he blew 3 sweet notes, such sweet notes as it. Sorry. Once more he stepped into the street, and to his lips again laid his long pipe of smooth straight cane. And ere he blew 3 notes, such sweet soft notes as yet musicians cunning never gave the enraptured air. There was a rustling that seemed like a bustling of merry crowds justling on pitching and hustling. Small feet were pattering, wooden shoes clattering, little hands clapping, and little tongues chattering. And like foals in a farmyard where barley is scattering, out came the children, all the little boys and girls, with rosy cheeks and flaxen curls, sparkling eyes and teeth like pearls, tripping and skipping ran merrily after. The wonderful music was shouting and laughter. The mayor was dumb and the council stood as if they were changed into blocks of wood. Unable to move a step or cry to the children merrily skipping by, could only follow with an eye that joyous crowd at the piper's back, and how the mayor was on the rack, and the wretched council's bosoms beat as the piper turned from the high street to where the Weser rolled its waters, right in the way of their sons and daughters. How he returned from south to west, and to Copperberg Hill his steps addressed, and after him the children pressed. Great was the joy in every breast. He never can cross the mighty top, he's forced to let the piping drop, and we shall see our children stop. When lo, they reached the mountainside, a wondrous portal opened wide. As if a cavern was suddenly hollowed, the piper advanced and the children followed. And when all were in to the very last, the door in the mountainside shut fast. Did I say all, no one was lame, and did not dance the whole way. In and after years, if you would blame his sadness, he was used to say, "It is dull in our town since my playmates left. I can't forget that I'm bereft of all the pleasant sights they see, which the piper also promised me. For he led us, he said, to a joyous land, joining the town in just at hand, where waters gushed and fruit trees grew, flowers put forth a fairer hue, and everything was strange and new. The sparrow was brighter than the peacock here, and their dogs outran our fellow deer, and honeybees had lost their stings, and horses were born with eagle's wings. And just as I became assured, my lame foot would be speedily cured, the music stopped and I stood still, and found myself outside the hill, left behind against my will, to go now limping as before, and never hear of that country more." So here we have two survivors who, one avoids the rat avoids the fate of his rat family or companions, because he's stout as Julius Caesar. Whereas with the boy, he's left behind because he's crippled. said, I'm not entirely sure what to make of the differentiation between the stout rat, the rat that's stout like Julius Caesar, and the crippled boy who's, who limps and is lame. That's how the narrator describes the boy's affliction. But I do think it's it's something that I'll give some thought to. It's definitely something that needs to be explicated and analyzed. But anyways, so we see that there's another argument being made here about what art accomplishes. Here he's saying that, art can also produce the effect of, there's that whole that stanza, the first stanza that I recited to you. We see that the children are, in a state of ecstasy and delight. Music is producing on these children a really joyous effect, right? Like it's. But that's the reason why it's so powerful, is because it is able to manipulate those ecstatic emotional energy in people, right? And we see that in the hallucinations that the children, or the images that the Pied Piper's music conjures for the children, is of a world that is better than their own. So it's a place where honeybees have lost their stings and horses are born with eagle's wings. Place of abundance, and waters gushed and fruit trees grew, and flowers put forth a fairer hue. So everything in the world, the utopian imagery that the Pied Piper's art induces in the children's minds is very tempting. It's very very utopian. So we see this opposition, this contrast being played out. And like I said, this poem is a great poem as a study in composition, It's a masterfully crafted poem, in my opinion. That's all I'm saying. I just want to reiterate the definition of parable, and I defined that yesterday. Parable expresses an abstract argument by means of using a concrete narrative. So what I'm trying to describe is the abstract argument that underlies the concrete narrative of the Pied Piper of Hamelin by Robert Browning. So we see that there's two outcomes to the seem to have lost a bagel. It's probably stuck on the bottom. Pot. Parable expresses an abstract argument by means of using a concrete narrative. So I think that Robert Browning is struggling to find, so he sort of identified two different ways that art functions in democracies. In the democracy of Hamlin Town in particular. And it either the art leads, like it did the rats, to a dystopian catastrophe, or it leads the children, like the children of Hamlin, to a utopian country. It's called a country, or a country or land that where there's no suffering, where there's abundance and purity and beauty all around. And it seems to me that, you know, the consequences of both expressions, the consequence of artistic expression that leads to bad behavior, overconsumption, like in the example of the rats, leads to catastrophe, but also the representation that influences the children also leads to catastrophe. So. Somebody's at my door. Not sure what they want. I generally don't open the door for people that I don't know, since this is downtown Vancouver after all. This is standing there. He's yelling at me to let him in. I'm not going to let him in. If he needs to use the washroom, there's a Tim Hortons just down the street. So I'm coming back. Looks sort of intoxicated. I really can't let him in here while I'm alone. So if he doesn't leave me alone, I'm going to have to call the police. He gave me the bird and walked away. He flipped me the bird. So he seems to be giving us two competing visions of what artistic expression, the effect that artistic expression has on the citizens of a democracy. And it either leads, like the rats, to to overconsumption that leads them to devour everything in their path, and then consume so much that, they're consuming this illusion that leads them to catastrophe. Or else it's so delightful and ecstatic that we forget we forget the real world, like the children do. They're led into, they're so delighted and seduced by the imagery that the Pied Piper promises is in the vision that he produces through his music. Leads them into they're essentially abducted by utopia. So in both cases, it seems to me that there's a lot of ambivalence in this narrative about what what is the benefit of art, or is it entirely detrimental? The poem seems fairly pessimistic about artistic expression in a democracy. It only ever achieves something propagandistic. Either we're being lured by a fantasy that leads us to. How's your morning going?
Not too bad, man.
Pretty good? So yeah, I think that there's a lot of ambivalence in how Robert Browning describes the power of artistic expression. Well, in a lot of ways, the way that the Pied Piper's music affects people it's not as magical as you think. Like in the poem, it seems pretty magical that he's able to like, you know, he's able to manipulate any living creature with music, right? He says that in one, he says that when he like he advanced towards the council table, and please your honor, said he, I am able, by means of secret charm, to draw all the creatures living beneath the sky, that swimmers, fly or swim or run after me, so as you never saw. And I chiefly use my charm on creatures that do people harm, the mole and toad and newt and viper. People call me the Pied Piper. And here they notice round his neck a scarf of red and yellow stripe to match with his coat, a self-same check. And on its scarf's end hung the pipe, and his fingers they noticed were ever straying, as if impatient to be playing upon this pipe, as low it dangled over his vesture, so old-fangled. I guess what, Robert Browning seems to be arguing here is that with art and democracy, it's just sort of like pick your propaganda, right? Like it's either you pick a art art is just there to manipulate the masses, right? Like, pick your own propaganda. That seems to be what is being suggested by Robert Browning. Either, you know, in democracy, either you choose to, either art is taking you, is manipulating your behavior so it becomes destructive, or else it steals your heart and takes you to a fantasy land, like the children, or but the choice seems to be between either we follow the artist as we take the artist's lead and follow the artist, or we follow the populist demagogue, which is the mayor. Which do we choose? Do we choose the mayor, or do we take the chance on art? We take a chance on art, and either we'll end up with a dystopia or we'll end up with a utopian society. Well, that's about it for this morning. I'm going to shut down the stream fairly soon. Just to finish off, I'm going to recite the entire poem from its beginning to end. Or almost to its end. I'm working on memorizing the last part of the stanza, the last half of the last stanza, or the last quarter of the last stanza. It's not too far off that I'll have the whole poem memorized. Anyways, thank you for listening to my stream and watching my stream. Hopefully the audio is not too bad. I'm gonna try to get an external microphone in the future here. I just haven't picked one that I want to buy, and I haven't saved it for money yet. So. Here it goes. This is Robert Browning's Pied Piper of Hamelin. Hamelin towns in Brunswick, by famous Hanover city. The river Weser, deep and wide, washes its wall on the southern side. A pleasanter spot you never spied, but when begins my ditty, almost 500 years ago. To see the townsfolk suffer so from vermin was a pity. Rats, they fought the dogs and killed the cats, and bit the babies in the cradles, and ate the cheeses from the vats, and licked the soup from the cook's own ladles, split open the kegs of salted sprats, made nests in the men's Sunday hats, and even spoiled the women's chats by drowning out their speaking with shrieking and squeaking in 50 different sharps and flats. At last the people in a body to the town hall came flocking. "'Tis clear," cried they, "our mayor is a naughty, and as for our corporation, shocking, to think we buy gowns lined with ermine, for dolts who can't or won't determine what's best to rid us of our vermin. You hope because you're old and obese to find in the furry civic robes ease. Rouse up, sirs, give your brains a racking, to find the remedy we are lacking. We're sure as fate will send you packing." At this the mayor and corporation quaked with a mighty consternation. An hour they sat in council. At length the mayor broke silence. For a gilder eyed my ermine gown self. I wish I were a mile hence. It's easy to bid my rack one's brain. I'm sure my forehead aches again. I scratch it so, but all in vain. Oh, for a trap, a trap, a trap. Just as he said this, what should hap? At the chamber a gentle tap. Bless us, cried the mayor, what's that? With the corporation as he sat, looking little through wonder as fat, nor brighter were his eyes, nor moister, nor too long opened oyster, save when at noon his paunch grew mutinous, or a plate of turtle green and glutinous, only a scraping of shoes on a mat. Anything like the sound of a rat makes my heart look pretty fat. He advanced toward, "Come in," cried the mayor, looking bigger, and then did come the stranger's figure. His long clear coat from heel to head was half yellow and half red, and he himself was tall and thin, with sharp blue eyes, each like a pin, and light loose hair and swarthy skin, nor tuft of hair on cheek nor beard on chin, but lips where a smile went out and in. There was no guessing his kith or kin, and nobody could enough admire this tall man in his quaint attire. Quoth one, "It's as my great-grandsire, starting up at the trump of doom's tone, had walked this way from his painted tombstone." He advanced towards the council table, "And please, your honor," said he, "I am able, by means of secret charm to draw, all the creatures living beneath the sun, the crawl or swim or fly or run, after me so as you never saw. And I chiefly use my charm on creatures that do people harm, the mole and toad and newt and viper, and people call me the Pied Piper." And here they noticed round his neck a scarf of red and yellow stripe, to match with his coat the selfsame check, and at scarf's end hung a pipe, and his fingers they noticed were ever straying, as if impatient to be playing upon this pipe, as low it dangled over his vesture so old-fangled. "Yes," said he, "Pied Piper as I am, in Tartaria bred the cam, last June from his huge swarms of bats. I eased in Asia the Nizam, the monsters brood of vampire bats. And as for what your brain bewildered, if I rid your town of rats, will you give me 1,000 guilders?" 50,000 was the exclamation of an astonished mayor and corporation. Into the street the piper stepped, smiling first a little smile, as if he knew what magic slept in his quiet pipe the while. Like a musical adept, to blow his pipe his lips he wrinkled, in green and blue his sharp eyes twinkled, like a candle flame where salt is sprinkled. And ere 3 shrill notes the pipe uttered, you heard as if an army muttered, and a muttering grew to a grumbling, and a grumbling grew to a mighty rumbling, and out of the houses came the rats tumbling, great rats, small rats, lean rats, brawny rats, brown rats, black rats, gray rats, tawny rats, grave old plotters, gay young friskers, fathers, mothers, uncles, cousins, cocking tails and pricking whiskers, families by tens and dozens, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, followed the Pied Piper for their lives. From street to street he piped advancing, and step to step he followed dancing, until they came to the river Weser, wherein all plunged and perished, save one who stout as Julius Caesar swam across and looked at charity, as he the manuscript he cherished, to land home commentary, which was, at first real notes of the pipe, I heard a sound as of scraping tripe, and putting apples wondrous right, even the cider presses great, and a moving away of pickle top boards, and leaving a jar of conserve covers, the drawing the corks of glass, and the breaking the hoops of butter cast, and it seemed as if a voice, sweeter far than by harp or by Solari's breed, called out, "Oh, rats, rejoice! The world is growing through the vast red sultry. So munch on, punch on, take your munch on. Breakfast, supper, dinner, lunch on. And just as a bulky sugar punch on, already staved like a great sun shone. Gracious, scarce an inch before me, just as me thought it said, come for me. I found the weather rolling over me. You should have heard the Hamlin people ring the bells so they rock the steeple. Go, cried the mayor, get long poles, poke out the nests and block up the holes. Consult with carpenters and builders, and leave in our town not even a trace of the rats, when suddenly up the face of the piper perked in the marketplace, with the first, if you please, my 1,000 guilders. 1,000 guilders, the mayor looked blue, so did the corporation too, for council dinners made rare havoc with claret, Moselle, Vinaigrette, Hawk, and half the money would replenish their cellar's biggest butt of Rhenish, to pay this sum to a wondering fellow, with gypsy coats red and yellow. Besides, quoth the mayor with a knowing wink, our business was done at the river's brink. We saw with our eyes the vermin sink, and what's dead can't come to life, I think. So, friend, we are not folks to shrink from our duty of giving you something to drink, and a matter of money to put in your poke. But as for the guilders, what we spoke of them, as you well know, was a joke. Besides, our losses have made us thrifty. 1,000 guilders, come, take 50. The piper's face fell and he cried, no trifling, I can't wait beside. I promise a visit by dinner time, Baghdad, and accept the prime of the head cook's pottage, all he's rich in, for having left in the Caleb's kitchen, of a nest of scorpions no survivor. With him I prove no bargain driver, with you don't think I'll bake a spider. And folks who put me in a passion may find me pipe after another fashion. How, cried the mayor, do you think I brook, being worse treated than a cook? Insulted by a ribald, with idle pipe and vesture piebald. Threaten us, fellow, do your worst, blow your pipe there till you burst. Once more he stepped into the street, and to his lips again laid his long pipe of smooth straight cane. And ere he blew 3 notes, such sweet, soft notes as yet musicians cunning never gave the enraptured air. There was a rustling that seemed like a bustling of merry crowds justling at pitching and hustling. Small feet were pattering, wooden shoes clattering, and little hands clapping, and little tongues chattering, and like foals in a farmyard when barley is scattering, out came the children, all the little boys and girls, with rosy cheeks and flax and curls, and sparkling eyes and teeth like pearls. Tripping and skipping ran merrily after, the wonderful music was shouting and laughter. The mayor was dumb and the council stood as if they were changed into blocks of wood, unable to move a step or cry to the children merrily skipping by, could only follow with an eye that joyous crowd at the piper's back, and how the mayor was on the rack, and the wretched council's bosom to beat as the piper turned from the high street to where the Weser rolled its waters, wiping the way of their sons and daughters. How he returned from south to west, and to Koppelberg the steps addressed, and after him the children pressed. Great was the joy in every breast. How he returned from south to west, to Koppelberg Hill the steps addressed. And after him the children pressed. Great was the joy in every breast. He never could cross the mighty top. He forced to let the piping drop, and we shall see our children stop. When lo, they reached the mountainside, a wondrous portal opened wide, as if a cavern was suddenly hollowed. The piper advanced and the children followed. When all were in at the very last, the door on the mountainside shut fast. Did I say all? No, one was lame and could not dance the whole of the way. In and after years, if you would blame his sadness, he was used to say, it is dull in our town since my playmates left. I can't forget that I'm bereft of all the pleasant sights they see, which the piper also promised me. Before he led us, he said, to a joyous land, joining the town in jest at hand, where waters gushed and fruit trees grew, and flowers were first fairer hue, and everything was strange and new. The sparrow was brighter than the peacock here, and their dogs are around our fellow deer, and honeybees had lost their stings, and horses were born with eagle's wings, and just as I became assured, my lame foot would be speedily cured, the music stopped and I stood still, and found myself outside the hill, left behind against my will, to go now living as before, and never hear of that country more. Alas, alas for Hamelin, there came into many a burgher's pate a text which says that heaven's gate opes to the rich at as easy rate as the needle's eye takes a camel in. The mayor sent east, west, north, and south to offer the piper by word of mouth, wherever it was men's lot to find him, silver and gold to his heart's content, if only he'd return the way he went, and bring the children behind him. But when they saw 'twas lost endeavor, and piper and dancers were gone forever, they made a decree that lawyers never should think their records dated duly, if after the day of the month and year, these words do not as well appear. And so long after what happened here on the 22nd of July, 1376, and the better is no mean fixed.